So, really quick, if you haven't seen my most recent episode from yesterday at the very end of the day, make sure you check it out at some point because it's on Monster Manual and I talk about this exciting card and discuss whether it's a brand new green staple. But don't leave just yet because on this episode, I'm going to be talking about every single way that I could think about to break this card. So, with all that said, let's jump into it. So, Pact Weapon is an equipment that costs 3 and a black, and its equip cost is discard a card. As long as it's attached to a creature, you don't lose the game for having 0 or less life. So, yeah, that is a really powerful thing and a very exciting thing. As long as you can keep it attached to a creature, you don't lose the game by, the normal Magic rules. Or at least I should say the main way that most players lose the game. And on top of that, whenever a equipped creature attacks, draw a card and reveal it. That creature gets +X until end of turn, and you lose X life where X is that card's mana value. So that's obviously a nice effect, but the more important effect is cool. If we attach this to a creature, we have the potential to not be able to lose the game by being at 0 or less life. And while we're at 0 or less life, we can do some pretty funny things. So this is kind of like a Phyrexian Unlife in a way, but also, again, it does have the requirement that you do need to keep it attached to a creature. So we're going to talk about the best kinds of creatures to attach this to so that we can keep it around, and then the best kinds of things to, well, get our life total down to 0. Obviously, this can help by attacking and drawing cards. You can lose life, but there are other ways to ensure essentially that we get down to exactly 0 life, or, maybe even less at some point with certain things. And then also on top of that, we're going to talk about ways to take advantage of being at 0 life, because again, that can actually be an upside in some ways, which is kind of weird. Regardless, again, I am going to point out every single way that I could think about to break this card, and I would love to hear from you as well. So, if I'm missing something, please let me know in the comments below on other ways to break this card. So yeah, comment below with your thoughts, and with all that said, let's jump into it. So one of the first cards that came to my mind is Elusive Tormentor, or should I say Insidious Mist. Regardless, Elusive Tormentor is a 4/4 Vampire Wizard for 2 black that has pay 1, discard a card, transform it. And on the backside, we've got Insidious Mist, a 0/1 elemental with hexproof and indestructible, and those are the 2 keywords that I definitely was looking for and thinking of when I saw this new equipment. Now, Insidious Mist can't block and can't be blocked, which is nice, and when it attacks and it isn't blocked, you can pay 2 and a black, and if you do, transform it. So yeah, obviously the original intention of this card is cool. All right, let's, transform Elusive Tormentor into Insidious Mist. It's got hexproof and indestructible, so it really, really is hard to deal with. Nearly impossible to deal with, in certain situations if you're playing in certain colors that don't have ways to actually deal with this. And yeah, it can't block, but also can't be blocked, so you get it through, and then you flip it over and you're like, haha, I hit you with a 4/4. But in this situation, it's more so, no, I'm just going to attach this equipment to it, and if I get down to 0 life, that's okay. Now, I will mention, obviously, again, there are other ways to lose outside of getting down to 0 life. Obviously, someone could, take you out with commander damage, or, poison counters, or, they could mill you, etc., etc., etc. That being said, the most common way, at least for most metas, is to be taken out, by getting your life total down to 0. So, yeah, even in Commander, that's generally what players do. And if you can prevent yourself from losing if you're at 0 by, say, again, equipping, this new equipment to something like Insidious Mist and just keeping it around, that can be a very powerful thing. And also, again, this is not an infallible thing. There are ways that players can take out this creature. For example, they might have an Edict effect or a mass bounce spell. Things like that could take out Insidious Mist. So even though it has hexproof and indestructible, which makes it incredibly difficult to deal with, and again, the vast majority of board wipes, and also obviously target removal, don't work on it. That being said, target removal do work on our equipment, but of course there are ways to protect that as well. Regardless, let's jump into some other creatures that might be able to help us out too. For example, we've got Fleecebane Lion, which is a 3/3 cat, and it's got Monstrosity 1 if we pay 3 green and a white, and as long as it's monstrous, it has hexproof and indestructible. So again, our 2 keywords that we are really looking for. Next up, how about a commander that can actually utilize this card in a fantastic way? Rayami, First of the Fallen, is a 5/4 vampire, and it has... If a non-token creature would die, exile that card with a blood counter on it instead. As long as an exile creature card with a blood counter has flying, Rayami First of the Fallen has flying, same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Haste, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Protection, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. So a ton of keywords, and again, two of those keywords in there are Hexproof and Indestructible, so yeah. If we can get creatures with those keywords, exile with blood counters on them, we're going to be in a good spot. And speaking of which, Soul Flayer is very similar, but it's kind of like this, but with Delve, so when it's exiling those creatures, it's going to have, basically the keywords that it exiled with the Delved creatures. Again, Hexproof Indestructible is not foolproof, but it is very difficult to deal with a creature that has each of those. But now that we've talked about getting a creature that is very protected and getting our equipment on it, well, let's talk about ways to get down to 0 life. And there are some ways to get down to exactly 0 life with Wall Blood, Mischievous Poltergeist, and Blood Celebrant. Wall Blood has pay 1 life, Wall Blood gets ++1 until end of turn. So yeah, you can just do that as many times as you want. Now, typically, again, you wouldn't want to get down to 0 life, but in this situation, yeah, this can set ourselves up for a pretty big play. So we're going to do that once we're set up properly. And then Mischievous Poltergeist is a very, very good example of this. Pay 1 life, regenerate Mischievous Poltergeist. So this creature can be pretty hard to deal with as well. Again, being able to regenerate essentially on command. And yeah, again, it just can help set our life to whatever we want. I guess essentially lower than our life total is. And then in a somewhat interesting way, Blood Celebrant has pay a black, pay 1 life, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So essentially what you'd have to do is add a black mana to your mana pool and then utilize that to activate the ability again, and then again and again until, you get to whatever life total you want. Again, in this case, 0. Now, of course, there are actually ways to get a lot of value out of this interaction by getting your life total down to 0. I mean, Necropotence is one that definitely comes to mind. It's very expensive, and so is Ad Nauseam, but we'll get to that here in a bit. Necropotence has skip your draw step whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. By paying 1 life, you exile the top card of your library face down for that card in your hand at the beginning of your next end step. So this one, you can essentially be like, all right, I'm just going to pay all my life and basically not draw that many cards, but, kind of Necropotence them, exile them, get them, at the beginning of your next end step. And speaking of getting access to a ton of cards, Ad Nauseam says, really top card of your library and put that card into your hand. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. Repeat this process any number of times. So with this, again, this is not a pay life. This is a loss of life. So we can just keep doing this even if we're, at 0 life or less. So essentially, we can stop this whenever we want. And yeah, we just basically can draw our entire library if we really wanted to. And actually, that is one way to technically win with either of these, essentially. If you've got like a Lab Maniac or a Thassa's Oracle, you can just win by not having a library, by, just drawing your entire library with 0 life. Next up, you can also have a mass pay life effect with things like Plague of Vermin or Phyrexian Processor. Plague of Vermin says, starting with you, each player may pay any amount of life. Repeat this process until no one pays life. Each player puts a 1/1 black rat creature token into play for each 1 life they paid this way. So this can actually be a finisher in its own in a way, because you can be like, well, I'm willing to pay 40 life and go down to 0 because I've got my equipment on my creature, so I'm at 0 life. I'm still around and I've got 40 rats, and your opponents aren't going to be willing to do that. And then Phyrexian Processor has it as it enters the battlefield, pay any amount of life, and by paying 4 and tapping it, you get an XX black minion creature token on the battlefield where X is the life paid as Phyrexian Processor enter the battlefield. So you can set your life total down to 0 and start making some massive creatures. Now, there are other scenarios where you can get down to 0 with things like Hex Parasite, Immolating Soul Eater, and Pestilent Soul Eater. Each of these has an ability that can utilize Phyrexian mana repeatedly, and again, Phyrexian mana essentially is either the color of the mana or, again, 2 life. So in order to get down to 0 with any of these, you would have to actually be at an even amount of life when you are activating. So just make sure that you keep in mind that there are different ways to get down to 0 life, including paying a giant chunk of life at once, paying 1 life at a time, or again, if you are at, a certain amount of life, again, an even increment in this, scenario, being able to pay even increments with Phyrexian mana over and over and over again. That being said, what's the purpose of getting down to 0 life? Well, my favorite card for this situation is definitely Repay in Kind. It's a sorcerer that says each player's life total becomes the lowest life total among all players. So again, we don't lose the game for having our life total equal 0 or, even less, but our opponents very much will, unless they've got the exact same equipment out or Phyrexian Unlife, but chances are they probably don't. Regardless, all we need to do is, when we're ready, set our life total again with any of those ways to set our life total down to 0, then cast this and say, well, if it resolves, all of my opponents just lose, because their life total becomes equal to mine, which again is either going to be 0 or even less than that if we've got something like Ad Nauseam going. So yeah, you can do some pretty cool things once you're down to 0 life. And of course, there are somewhat similar cards to this one, though it is more of a one-off scenario with cards like Profane Transfusion, Soul Conduit, and Excess of Mortality. Profane Transfusion says 2 target players exchange life totals, and you get a giant creature, or a creature equal to the difference between those life totals, but still, the main thing here is you exchange life totals with someone else. So again, if you're at 0, someone's at 40, you're like, cool, okay. You're at 0, so you lose, and I'm back up to 40. Yay! And I get a giant creature, too. Next up, Soul Conduit is a repeatable effect. It has pay 6, tap 2 target players exchange life totals. So with this one, yeah, you could just say, okay, I'm at 0, you're at 40. Let's switch. Cool, I'm back to 40. And then, you get yourself set up again next turn, and then you do to someone else, etc., etc., etc. Moving on, a favorite card of mine, Excess of Mortality, says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may have 2 target players exchange life totals. So this one, you do have to get around to your upkeep, but obviously if you do, yep, you can switch life totals around. Just know with this one in particular, you are definitely showing what you are about to do, so players are going to try to stop you. Versus Soul Conduit, if you've got the mana for it, I guess, you definitely can do all that in one turn. That being said, I did mention Rayami as a commander that might want to utilize that card, especially if you are kind of going in that very specific direction of, ensuring that your life total goes down. You could do some pretty spicy things with that. But another commander that definitely comes to mind is Selenia Dark Angel. And actually, this is a deck that was inspired by Excess of Mortality a long time ago. Selenia is a 3/3, I believe Angel, again, it says Summon Legend on it, for 3 white and a black, and she has pay 2 life, return Selenia to its owner's hand. So essentially, with this, again, if you are an even life total, you can keep activating this again and again and again. I mean, you need to, put it on the stack and then, activate again, put it on the stack, do it again, because, you don't want Selenia to return to your hand before you can keep activating it. But essentially, again, before your turn, you just do this, get your life total down to 0, and then, again, use something like Repay in Kind. Now, obviously, Pact Weapon does not have to be utilized in a way where you're taking advantage of getting down to 0 life or where you're trying to get down to 0 life. There are going to be plenty of scenarios where this is just a solid card because it's just a way for you to, well, get some extra card advantage, pump your, probably commander or, other creature that you've attached to, and then also just, another way to say, okay, at least I'm still alive even if I get down to 0 life. It's another, thing that your opponents actually have to deal with. But of course, like I mentioned, it does have the potential to do some pretty crazy things. And of course, if I missed any combinations with this card, make sure you let me know in the comments below. And also, make sure you're staying to this channel for even more exciting quick takes and spoilers coming up. And with that, the show has come to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you, so make sure you comment below and let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.